Elena groaned as sunlight stabbed through the curtains. Her head pounded like a drum, and her mouth tasted like spoiled wine. She sat up slowly, wincing at the throbbing behind her temples. Last night was a blur. Her ex's engagement party, too many glasses of champagne, the humiliating moment she realized he had moved on. Then, the car ride home. She frowned, looking down. These weren't the clothes she had worn last night. Her expensive black dress was gone. Instead, she wore soft silk pajamas, ones she never put on herself. Her stomach twisted. The driver, Daniel, the quiet man who had only been working for her for a month, he was the one who brought her home, which meant her breath quickened. He had seen her, touched her, changed her. Rage burned through the haze of her hangover. She stormed into the garage, still in her pajamas, her bare feet slapping against the marble floor. Daniel was polishing the car, his back turned. "You." He turned, his dark eyes calm. "Good morning, ma'am." "Did you change my clothes last night?" Her voice was sharp, trembling. Daniel didn't flinch. "Yes." Her face burned. "You had no right." "I called your maid, but she didn't answer. You were covered in—" She didn't let him finish. Her palm cracked across his face. Daniel didn't move, didn't react, just stared at her, his cheek reddening. "You're fired," she hissed. "And if I find out you touched me in any other way, I'll ruin you." His jaw tightened, but he only nodded. Understood. Then, without another word, he turned, grabbed his bag from the boys' quarters, and walked out. Elena stood there, shaking. She told herself she was right. He had crossed a line. He had seen her. But as the garage door closed behind him, a sick feeling settled in her stomach. What really happened last night? And why did Daniel look disappointed instead of guilty? Elena sat on the edge of her bed, her fingers gripping the silk sheets until her knuckles turned white. The pounding in her head was nothing compared to the ache in her chest. It was true. Her fiancé, Marcus, the man she had planned a future with, had betrayed her. And not with just anyone, with her closest friend, Sophia. She had heard the rumors, but refused to believe them. So, like a fool, she had gone to their engagement party last night. She had walked in, smiling, pretending she was fine. And then she saw them. Marcus, with his arm around Sophia's waist, kissing her in front of everyone, laughing, happy. The room had spun. Her heart had shattered. She had left immediately, her pride barely holding her together until she reached the nearest bar. Then she drank, glass after glass, until the world blurred, until the pain dulled, until she couldn't remember her own name. And then, nothing. Blackness. Now, she was here, in her bed, in different clothes, because of Daniel, her driver, a man she barely knew. He had seen her at her weakest, drunk, disgusting, vulnerable. And he had touched her. The thought made her skin crawl. She stood abruptly, her legs unsteady. The mirror across the room reflected a woman she barely recognized, pale, disheveled, eyes red from tears and lack of sleep. Humiliation burned through her. How could she have let this happen? How could she have lost control like that? And Daniel? He had stripped her naked, changed her clothes, seen everything. What else had he done while she was unconscious? Her stomach twisted. She couldn't let this go. She couldn't just fire him and pretend it never happened. She had to make him pay. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from Sophia. "Elena, I know you're upset, but we need to talk. Marcus and I—" She threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall with a satisfying crack. Tears threatened again, but she forced them back. No, she wouldn't cry over them. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. But Daniel was different. He had taken advantage of her. He had violated her privacy. And for that, he would regret ever laying a hand on her.
She stormed into her closet, yanking open drawers, searching for something to wear. Her hands trembled with rage. She would find him. She would make sure he never worked again. She would destroy him. But first, she needed to know exactly what he had done. Her security system had cameras. Every room, every angle. If Daniel had touched her inappropriately, she would have proof. And then she would ruin him. She dressed quickly, her movements sharp, angry. Her reflection in the mirror was cold now, hard. The heartbroken woman from moments ago was gone. In her place stood someone dangerous, someone who had been betrayed too many times, and someone who was done being a victim.
Elena Kings was the beloved only daughter of billionaire industrialist Victor Kings. Beautiful, kind-hearted, and raised in luxury, she had never known true hardship. Until now. She had loved Marcus deeply, believing in their fairy tale future. So when rumors spread of his betrayal, she refused to accept it. Until she saw him proposing to her best friend, Sophia, at their engagement party. Heartbroken and humiliated, she fled to a bar, drowning her sorrows in alcohol until she blacked out. Now, as she sat in her private home office, staring at the security footage from last night, her hands trembled. The video played before her. Daniel carrying her inside, her vomit-stained dress clinging to her, his face etched with concern. Him laying her gently on the bed, hesitating before calling out for her maid, only to get no response. Him leaving briefly, likely to find help, but returning alone when no one answered. Then the moment she dreaded, him carefully undressing her. But what she saw next stunned her. Daniel worked quickly, his eyes averted as much as possible, his touch clinical but gentle. He cleaned her with a damp cloth, his expression pained, not with lust, but with pity. Then came the worst part. Drunk and heartbroken, she had mistaken him for Marcus. "Please, don't leave me," she had begged, clinging to him. "Love me, just for tonight." Daniel had frozen. Then, with surprising tenderness, he pulled her hands away and tucked her in. "You deserve better than this," he murmured before walking out. Tears blurred Elena's vision. She had slapped him, accused him, threatened to destroy his life, and yet he had been nothing but kind. Her chest tightened with shame. How could she have misjudged him so badly? And now he had seen her at her absolute worst, broken, desperate, begging for love from a man who wasn't even there. The humiliation burned, but beneath it, something else stirred. He had treated her with more care than Marcus ever had. She wiped her tears, staring at the paused footage. Daniel hadn't just cleaned her up, he had protected her dignity when she had none left. And how had she repaid him? With cruelty. Her fingers hovered over her phone. Should she call him? Apologize? But what could she even say? "Sorry I accused you of assault when you were the only one who showed me kindness?" And worse, he had heard her beg for love. He had seen how shattered she truly was. Could she ever face him again? Elena took a deep breath. She couldn't undo what she had done, but she could make it right. First, she would find him. Then, she would thank him. And maybe, just maybe, she would finally let someone see the real her. Not the perfect heiress, but the woman who had been hurt and was slowly learning to heal.
Elena sat in her penthouse, the security footage still playing on loop. Daniel's gentle hands wiping her face, his patient voice calming her drunken pleas. The way he had tucked her in like something precious rather than the mess she had been. Her chest ached. She wanted to reach out, needed to, but her pride coiled around her throat like a noose. How could she face him after what she'd done? Slapping him, firing him, accusing him of things he hadn't done? Again, he had seen her all naked, and that was really embarrassing. Perhaps it was best she let him go and forget anything ever happened. And yet,
The way he had cared for her, without expectation, without judgment, haunted her. More than that, it stirred something unfamiliar inside her. Desire. Something deep. Something real. The realization terrified her. 3 days passed, 3 sleepless nights. Finally, Elena couldn't take it anymore. She dressed simply, no designer labels, no jewelry, and had her new driver take her to the address listed in Daniel's employment file. The apartment building was run down, but not decrepit. Faded paint, cracked steps, but clean. Her stomach knotted as she knocked. A young woman answered, pale, thin, with Daniel's eyes. "Hello?" The girl coughed into her sleeve. Elena forced a smile. "I'm looking for Daniel." She studied her. "You're his old boss." A statement, not a question. Elena's face burned. "Yes, I needed to speak with him. He's out, job hunting." She stepped aside. "But you can wait if you want." The apartment was small. A worn couch, a single bookshelf stacked with engineering textbooks, a hot plate in place of a stove, but it was spotless. Elena sat gingerly. "You're his sister?" "Amara." Another cough. "He didn't do what you accused him of." Elena's throat tightened. "I know." Over bitter tea, Amara spoke between coughs. Their parents died young. Daniel studied engineering on scholarships in a reputable university. His last company collapsed after someone reported safety violations that would have saved lives but cost profits. Elena's hands shook around her cup. All this time she'd thought him beneath her, and yet he was 10 times the man Marcus would ever be. She stood abruptly. Tell him I'm sorry, and that I would like him to reach out to me." Amara laughed weakly. "He won't." "Why not?" "Because he liked you. He always spoke highly of you." Amara met her eyes. "And you made him feel like a predator for it." The words hit like a slap. Elena fled before the tears came. Her limo idled outside, but she couldn't bring herself to get in. Not when Daniel walked 3 miles daily to job interviews. Not when Amara's medicine sat unaffordable on a driver's salary. Most of all, not when she finally understood. Pride wasn't strength. And sometimes the strongest thing you could do was kneel in the dirt and apologize.
Days passed, and Elena heard nothing from Daniel. She had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that after visiting his home and meeting his sister, he would reach out. But there was only silence. Elena sat in her penthouse, restless. She hadn't been to work in days. Her assistant handled everything, and the staff whispered that she was still heartbroken over Marcus. But the truth was, Marcus no longer occupied her thoughts. It was Daniel who lingered in her mind. She didn't know much about him, only what she had seen that day in his small, clean apartment. His sick sister, Amaka, had spoken of him with such pride. A good man, a responsible brother, someone who had taken a job as a driver just to keep them afloat. Elena had left that day with a heavy heart, asking Amaka to tell Daniel she was sorry, but he never called. A gold-embossed envelope arrived one morning, Marcus and Sophia's wedding invitation. Elena stared at it, waiting for the familiar sting of betrayal. But she felt nothing. No anger, no pain, just emptiness. She tossed it aside without opening it. What did Marcus matter now? Her thoughts were elsewhere, on the man who had carried her home, cleaned her up, and walked away without asking for anything in return. Elena knew she couldn't just wait for Daniel to reach out. If he wouldn't come to her, she would find another way. Amaka's medical bills. That was something she could do. Something that might ease Daniel's burden, even if he never thanked her for it. Without hesitation, she arranged for the hospital to transfer all Amaka's treatment costs to her account. The best doctors, the best care, no questions asked. She didn't do it to win Daniel's forgiveness. She did it because it was right. Days turned into a week. Still no word from Daniel. Had Amaka told him? Did he know what she had done? Elena didn't know, but she refused to chase him again. She had apologized. She had tried to make amends. The rest was up to him.
One evening, as Elena sat alone in her penthouse, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. Her heart jumped. She opened the message. "Amaka is doing better. Thank you." No name, no further explanation. But she knew. It was Daniel. And for the first time in weeks, Elena smiled.
Elena stared at her door in disbelief as Sophia and Marcus stood there, smiling like they hadn't shattered her world weeks ago. Sophia, her supposed best friend, clutched Marcus's arm possessively, her eyes scanning Elena's penthouse with barely concealed envy. "We came to apologize," Sophia said sweetly, though her grip on Marcus tightened. "I never meant to hurt you, but Marcus and we just couldn't fight our feelings." Marcus, ever the charming liar, gave Elena his most regretful look. "I should have told you sooner, Elena. I always had feelings for Sophia, but I didn't know how to say it." Elena almost laughed. Liar. She knew Marcus too well. He didn't have feelings. He had opportunities. And Sophia, who had always been jealous of her, had finally gotten something Elena had. But instead of anger, Elena felt nothing. "The deed is done," she said calmly. "I've moved on." Sophia's smile faltered. She expected tears, rage, something to feed her ego. Instead, Elena's indifference unsettled her. Then came the insult. "Be my chief bridesmaid," she blurted. "I want us to stay friends." Elena's jaw clenched. "Friends? After this betrayal?" "I'll think about it," she lied, smoothly, ushering them out before she said something she'd regret. The moment the door closed, she exhaled sharply, her hands shaking, not from heartbreak, but from fury. How dare they? Just as her anger peaked, her phone rang. An unknown number. She almost ignored it, until a gut feeling made her answer. "Hello?" Silence. Then, "Elena." Her breath caught. "Daniel." His voice was low, hesitant. "I got your message. About Amaka." Elena's pulse raced. "Is she okay?" "She's better. Because of you." A pause. "Thank you." The sincerity in his voice melted her anger. "I didn't do it for thanks," she admitted softly. "I did it because it was right." Another silence. Then, "Can we talk? In person?" Elena's heart skipped. "Yes." They met at a quiet cafe, neutral ground. Daniel looked tired, but determined. No driver's uniform this time, just a simple shirt and jeans. "I owe you an apology," he said first. Elena blinked. "No, I do. I accused you of things you didn't do. I slapped you. I should have explained that night," he interrupted. "But I was angry. And ashamed." "Ashamed? Of what?" He met her eyes. "That I wanted to stay when you asked me to." The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Elena's breath hitched. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her face darkened. "What's wrong?" he asked. She hesitated, then showed him the screen. A news headline. "King heiress to attend ex's wedding as bridesmaid?" Beneath it, a photo of Sophia and Marcus leaving her penthouse, smirking. Elena's stomach dropped. "That's not happening," she said firmly. Daniel studied her. "Then what is happening, Elena?" The question wasn't just about the wedding. It was about them. Elena didn't think it was time to confess her feelings for him. Instead, she simply asked, no, pleaded for him to come to the wedding with her. "Just stand by my side," she said, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. "I'll take care of everything else." Daniel hesitated. "Elena, people will talk." She smirked. "Let them." 3 days before the wedding, a sleek car pulled up to Daniel's apartment. Inside, a tailor waited with a midnight blue suit, crisp white shirt, and polished shoes, all understated but undeniably expensive. "Miss King's insisted," the man said. Daniel touched the fabric, conflicted. But Amaka, now recovering thanks to Elena's anonymous payments, nudged him. "Go! She's different, brother. She sees you." The wedding was a spectacle of arrogance. Gold chandeliers, Sophia's smug smile as she clung to Marcus's arm. Then whispers erupted. Elena had arrived. Alone.
dressed in a sleek silver gown that made Sophia's frilla dress look cheap. The crowd held its breath. Then, a murmur at the back. Daniel stepped in. The suit fit him perfectly, emphasizing his broad shoulders, his quiet strength. Elena's breath caught. How had she never noticed how striking he was? Sophia's eyes narrowed. "Is that your driver?" Elena ignored her, offering Daniel her arm. "Took you long enough?" Sophia couldn't resist. She didn't expect Elena to show up. She knew wouldn't accept being her chief bridesmaid. Well, she had showed up, and this was an opportunity to further embarrass her. During cocktails, she accidentally bumped into Elena, sending champagne down her dress. "Oops," she simpered. "Still clumsy, aren't you?" Before Elena could react, Daniel stepped between them. "Apologize," he said, voice low but razor sharp. Sophia laughed. "Or what, you'll drive me home?" The crowd tittered. Then Daniel did something unexpected. He smiled. "No, but I'll tell everyone how Marcus paid me extra to keep quiet about his other fiancée in Lagos." Silence. Marcus turned white. Sophia's smile died. The wedding dissolved into chaos. Sophia shrieking, Marcus scrambling to deny it, guests recording everything on their phones. Through it all, Daniel stood firm, shielding Elena from the fallout. She stared at him, stunned. "You lied," she whispered. He met her eyes. "No, I protected you."
Later, in her penthouse, Elena poured 2 drinks. "Stay," she said simply. Daniel took the glass, their fingers brushing. "As what?" She smiled. "Let's find out." The morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains of Elena's penthouse, casting a golden glow over the rumpled sheets. Daniel stirred, blinking as the unfamiliar luxury of the room registered in his sleep-addled mind. Then it hit him. He was in Elena's bed. Before he could fully process it, the bedroom door opened. Elena walked in, barefoot and effortlessly elegant in a silk robe, balancing a tray of breakfast, fluffy scrambled eggs, fresh fruit, and coffee. Daniel sat up abruptly, the sheets pooling at his waist. "Elena, you didn't have to." "Hush," she said, grinning as she set the tray over his lap. "You've taken care of me. Let me return the favor." He stared at the food, then at her, still half convinced this was a dream. Elena perched playfully on the edge of the bed, her fingers brushing his. "Thank you, Daniel." His throat tightened. "For what?" "For carrying me home that night, for cleaning me up when I was a mess." She smirked. "For not taking advantage of me when I begged you to." Daniel's cheeks burned. The memory of her bare skin, her drunken pleas. God, he'd replayed that night in his head 1,000 times, equal parts guilt and longing. "I thought you'd hate me forever for seeing you like that," he admitted. Elena leaned closer. "Turns out I needed someone who'd see me at my worst and still look at me like I was worth something." Daniel traced the rim of his coffee cup, hesitant. "About yesterday, I shouldn't have lied about Marcus having another fiancée." Elena laughed, bright and unguarded. "Are you kidding? That was genius. Sophia looked like she was about to combust." He shook his head, but a smile tugged at his lips. "Still, I shouldn't have—" "Daniel." She caught his hand. "You stood up for me when no one else ever has. That's all that matters." A shadow crossed her face. "I need to apologize, too. For slapping you. For accusing you." She swallowed. "For making you feel like you were nothing to me." Daniel's chest ached. "You were hurt. I understood." "That's the problem," she whispered. "You always understand, even when you shouldn't." Their eyes locked. The air between them crackled. Daniel's voice dropped to a rough murmur. "How are you going to make it up to me?" Elena's lips curved. "What do you want?" He didn't hesitate. "A kiss." She closed the distance slowly, giving him time to pull away. But Daniel met her halfway, his hands sliding into her hair as their lips brushed, soft at first, then deeper, hungrier. Elena melted into him, the tray forgotten as she climbed into his lap. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the night I carried you home." Elena nipped his lower lip. "Took you long enough." Later, as they tangled in the sheets, Daniel froze. "Elena," his voice was strained. "This isn't just some revenge fling against Marcus, is it?" She stilled.
then cupped his face. "Daniel Okafor, look at me." Her thumb brushed his cheekbone. "I don't need revenge. I want you." A shuddering breath escaped him. Even though you're kind and brave and mine."
1 month later, the rain had stopped, and with it, so had the chaos of the past weeks. Daniel, once a quiet driver with secrets in his eyes, now walked into King's Industries wearing a tailored suit, not as a staff member. Elena had ensured he got the job, and he accepted the role with quiet pride. Meanwhile, Amaka, stronger than ever, opened her eyes to a new purpose. With Elena's full backing, she launched a health nonprofit focused on supporting young people battling chronic illness. What once nearly broke her body became the reason she stood taller than ever before. Sophia and Marcus, well, not every story ends in roses. 6 months into their whirlwind marriage, Marcus's third fiancée surfaced, and this time receipts came with it. Sophia packed her bags, her pride, and the lessons learned, and walked away with grace and a well-paid divorce settlement. As for Elena, she no longer looked at the world from her penthouse alone. She visited Amaka's center weekly, and she sat beside Daniel not just in boardrooms, but also on porches, in silence, watching rain fall with no fear of being alone again. Sometimes the people we overlook carry the strength to change our lives. Sometimes love comes dressed in humility. And sometimes healing begins with truth, no matter how late it arrives. If this story moved you, what would you do differently if given a second chance? Let us know in the comments.